I guess we get started. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this Friday morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. My name is Valdete Berisha, and I lead FinDev Gateway here at CGAP. Many of you are already familiar with FinDev Gateway. We are a platform of CGAP housed at the World Bank, and our role is to enable the financial inclusion community to share knowledge and engage in a constructive dialogue so that we can all learn from each other and ensure that our work has impact. For more on what we do and how we do that, I would like to invite you to visit our website. And so that way we can just get started with a session. But before we get started, I wanted to go over a few quick notes. This session is being recorded, so that allows us to share the recording with you after the webinar. So I hope everybody's comfortable with that. Please keep your microphones and cameras off. I was told we have 430 people who have registered, so we want to keep things running smoothly. If you have questions, and we hope you do, please share them in the chat box throughout the session. My colleagues and I will do our best to collect them and ask them at the end of the panel. So just make sure to keep your questions short, relevant, and to the point. And if you'd like to include the affiliation when you ask a question in the chat box, please do so. It just provides additional context. And if you run into any technical issues, my colleague Sarah here is to help. So thank you, Sarah, for being here. So we have a fantastic lineup of speakers, as you've seen from our webinar page. So we'll kick off with a fireside chat with CGAP CEO Sophie Sirtaine and Michael Schlein, CEO of Accion. They will set the stage for the growing need to focus on outcomes in financial inclusion. So we're looking forward to that chat. And then my colleague Karina Brons-Nielsen will lead a discussion on the Impact Pathfinder, CGAP's new interactive platform that maps the pathways from financial inclusion to development outcomes. I hope you all had a chance to play with the platform a little bit. We've shared the link in the past, so and if you haven't, I hope you do that later. So Karina will be joined by Stephanie Van Gool, Director of Impact at BBVA Microfinance Foundation, Bushle Gosler, FinTech entrepreneur, currently at Lula, an African SME financing firm, and Ed Whitten, Director of Impact at Baillie Gifford, an investment firm based in the UK. I'm not going to go into details, but you can find the bios of all the speakers on the FinDev webinar page. So please, if you're interested after the webinar, read their bios. In the meantime, I just want to welcome everybody and thank the speakers for taking their time to join this FinDev webinar, and I'll turn it over to you, Sophie.
Thank you very much, Valdete, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It's really a pleasure to be talking to all of you and benefiting from your insights today. Thank you also, Michael, for always being a champion and joining us in this journey. A journey in which, as Valdete said, we really would like to, as a community, as an industry, leverage the magnificent progress that we have, I hope, contributed to over the last decade in terms of progress in access to financial accounts, mobile or otherwise, in the world, to really make a difference in people's life and to leverage these accounts to create greater resilience, greater economic impact, access to services, etc. But before I say more about all of this, I want to benefit from your insights, Michael, since you've been indeed a champion for this agenda. And so, Michael, let me start by asking you why you agree with us that shifting the financial inclusion agenda towards outcomes is so important, especially right now.
So I'll give you the short answer, and then I'll give you a slightly more thoughtful answer. You're right. Over the last decade, we've made enormous progress, and we've gone from roughly 3 billion people being excluded to something like 2 billion people being excluded. The short answer is, to reach the next billion, we have to be much smarter, and that's why we need to be focusing on outcomes now. The next billion, the slightly longer answer, bigger context, I'm not even talking about recent current events. but we are living at an extraordinary moment in history. Over the last several decades, we have seen enormous progress helping people move out of poverty. We've literally seen hundreds of millions of people escape poverty. And I like to think that the people on this phone call, on this Zoom call, contributed to that. And for the first time in any of our lifetimes, that progress is being stalled. It's flatlined. We're not making progress anymore, and we're going in the wrong direction. And then add on current events and chaos and the undermining of the global infrastructure of aid. And so the work that we're doing, the work that this community is doing, is more urgent than it's ever been. Plus, at the same time, we've also seen extraordinary progress on harnessing digital technologies to reach people we've never been able to reach before and reach them in new ways. And of course, there's an explosion of data and data analytics, so we can really see people who have been invisible in the past. So there is this incredible moment that we need to seize, and I do think focusing on outcomes and really seeing what works and being smarter as we go after the next billion is the right agenda for the organization. And I applaud you and CGAP for your leadership.
Thanks, Michael. You could not have said it better. We have an enormous opportunity in front of us to leverage our progress to address the challenges of the world. But tell us, are we moving fast enough towards this outcome-driven approach? And what's holding us back? What do we need to look at to make faster progress?
I feel a real urgency. And again, I'm really not talking about the most recent current events. I feel a real urgency that we have for many of us who've been in this movement towards a financially inclusive world for a long time. Now we have extraordinary tools at our disposal, and we can see the solutions that are there. We don't have to imagine them. We can actually see them, but we have to really take them to much greater scale. And what that means is harnessing the capital markets. And to show the capital markets, you really need to show what works. And I think this Impact Pathfinder is one centralized place where you can really see all the knowledge that we have and see what works and what doesn't work. And also, perhaps even more importantly, the gaps. Let's see what we don't know. So I think, and just playing with it a little bit, it's very, very useful. And I understand there's also now going to be a generative AI conversational tool, so you can really understand in an easy fashion what we really know from a very authoritative source. So I think this is the right innovation at the right time.
Thank you, Michael. So you're saying we now have the tools and the opportunity to really drive forward with greater impact. What's at stake if we don't make that shift now? Who ultimately would bear the cost of inaction?
Obviously, the world's poor. I mean, for 2 billion people, the global financial system just fails them. They are invisible to it. It is invisible to them. And their lives are much, much harder, and much harder than they have to be. We all take for granted that we have credit cards and debit cards and ATMs and insurance for your home and for your family and, credit to build a home or go to school. And for 2 billion people, they have none of that. Even worse, they live in a cash world. And so they are not building any kind of credit history. And they are invisible and doomed to stay invisible. And yet we're seeing extraordinary innovation harnessing, data analytics, generative AI, global satellite data. There's been an explosion of new data sources. And if we can use technology and use those new sources of data, we can see people who have been invisible and really design the right responsible financial services to meet their needs. Accion, as you know, we're an investor, we're an advisor, and a research think tank. And this will help all of our work across all of that. I think we can invest smarter and see where we're working, consult and advise institutions on what they should be doing, and of course, research and further the body of work, but also fill in any gaps. So I think this Impact Pathfinder will shape the agenda for the next several years. And again, I think there is an urgency. If we're trying, I think we can create a financially inclusive world in our lifetime. But I do think right now is a challenging time for many, many people. And I do think we need to double down.
Thanks, Michael. So you're saying the vulnerable and excluded would suffer because fundamentally the promise of financial inclusion will remain a promise. You're saying our industry will suffer because we will not maximize our relevance or contribution. And at the end, you said, and I could not agree more, the world will suffer, development actors in general, because the contribution of financial inclusion to their agenda will not be optimized.
Take one moment and just imagine for a second what the world would be like if it were truly, if 2 billion people were included. Imagine if those 2 billion people could put a little more food on the table, keep their kids in school a little bit longer, save a little bit for the next drought or heat wave. Imagine if they could just save and have a little cushion for the next crisis. The world would be a much, much better place. And again, all of this is very doable and very doable in our lifetime. And we had been making great progress until now.
Thanks. I could not agree more. So if we look forward 5 years from now, the world has the potential to be a better place. What changes would the financial inclusion industry, all of us, have to make? What would the industry look like if we succeed?
Well, I think one of the things that we're most excited about is new sources of data. I mean, yeah, we talk about a fintech revolution, but in many ways it's a data revolution. And we are now harnessing sources of data that no lender has ever had before, no financial service provider has ever had before. We're working with a company that is, think about connecting farmers with small restaurants directly on a platform. And those restaurants, for example, you could do their traditional credit analysis if they have any of that data, but they also get, for example, Yelp comments or comments from, imagine if you could harness comments to then assess credit. We can do that today. That's generative AI. We can actually use all sorts of unstructured data that we have but have never been able to use. And all of a sudden now we can use it and factor it into credit decisions and other financial services decisions. So it's very, very exciting. We're seeing tremendous innovation. We're a very active early stage investor, and the innovation is absolutely stunning. And so I do think the combination of harnessing the capital markets, bringing capital into this sector, but also being more selective and smarter as we try to reach the hardest to serve populations. That's the challenge we have in the next couple of years.
Thank you, Michael. I think another challenge we have, and tell me if you agree, is the fact that we will need to work much more with other development actors in other fields to leverage the potential of financial inclusion, for instance, to address resiliency, to address climate needs from vulnerable people, etc. So working more with others will become necessary in our industry. How do you see that?
Absolutely. I think there's also, those partnerships are critical, but there's also another context that we're in. Many of the emerging markets that we all work in are really fragile right now. They stretched their resources enormously to navigate the pandemic. The debt levels are high. There's been all sorts of disruptions and little or no social safety net. And I think this moment is very, very precarious. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw defaults this year, and all of that hits the poor the hardest. Because governments cut back on services, interest rates get higher, everything hits the most vulnerable people the hardest. So I do worry about the period that we're in right now, just because it's very precarious.
And by saying that, you're just reinforcing the need for leveraging the power of financial inclusion, because financial inclusion is fundamentally what empowers everyone to protect themselves, to build their resiliency, to find their economic stability. And so you're just reinforcing the fact that this is the time where we really have to leverage the power of the investment we've made in accounts and empower people with financial cushions and financial means. So thank you very much, Michael. I think we're reaching the end of our fireside chat. And I'm now going to turn to Karina Nielsen, who's going to take us through the Impact Pathfinder and why we've developed that tool to underpin this progress towards maximizing the outcomes, the impact, the positive benefits of financial inclusion for everyone. Over to you, Karina.
Thank you, Sophie and Michael, for setting the stage and underlying why focusing on outcomes and evidence is so important in today's world. So whether you are joining today's webinar as an investor, a funder, researcher, practitioner, or policymaker, we are probably all had to make critical decisions where you want to ensure that your decisions or your practices or your advice creates meaningful impact. However, you might have also found yourself overwhelmed by a sea of reports, impact, and survey data, each presenting different angles and sometimes conflicting conclusions. So what is the real story and what truly works? We've all been there, relying on fragmented studies and anecdotal evidence, which can lead to unintended consequences and missed opportunities. And with resources tightening and priorities shifting, the need for reliable evidence has never been more critical. And this is where the Impact Pathfinder comes in. It simplifies the complex world of evidence, helping you identify effective strategies and knowledge gaps that need to be addressed. So here on the next slide, you will see a roadmap for our remaining time together. First, we're going to watch a 2-minute video, which tells you more about the Impact Pathfinder. Then we'll look at who the audiences are for the Pathfinder, and then we'll look at the underlying conceptual framework. Secondly, we'll look at the big picture findings from the Pathfinder so far. Thirdly, we'll do a live demo of the Pathfinder, and then we'll turn to our panel discussion with Bouchelet, Stephanie, and Ed to hear how they envision using the Pathfinder in their work. And then we will conclude by a Q&A. So let's jump right into watching a short explainer video of the Pathfinder.
How can financial inclusion drive transformative change? And what is its true impact? The answers are not easy to find and distill. Synthesizing the evidence and making it actionable is a monumental task. Enter Impact Pathfinder, a CGAP platform designed to shine a light on the effects of financial services. The Impact Pathfinder can simplify what is otherwise a very complicated world of evidence. It features over 600 studies that reveal how savings, credit, payments, and insurance can drive positive change, with insights on how risks can be minimized. Imagine you're interested in the role of digital credit in enhancing women's livelihoods. The platform outlines the impact pathways and guides you through the evidence. Check out the legend. Is the evidence link positive or not? And is that evidence strong or not? Click on the evidence map to see all relevant studies. If you have a specific question in mind, ask the AI chatbot. It's another way to gain personalized insights. We invite you to contribute to the Impact Pathfinder. Let us know how we can improve it. It is a living platform that will reveal knowledge gaps and catalyze future studies. With you, financial inclusion can challenge social norms around gender, bring informal entrepreneurs into the digital economy, and spur progress on climate action. Together, we can navigate the complexities of financial inclusion and drive meaningful change.
Thank you. Okay, so we have several audiences in mind for the Pathfinder. Collectively, we hope that the Impact Pathfinder will help a range of stakeholders make informed decisions about their interventions, where the evidence exists, and shape future learning agendas to address knowledge gaps in less well-evidenced impact pathways. This slide here summarizes some of the use cases for 5 broad audience groups. For example, we hope that the investors will channel investments towards underserved segments with a clear impact narrative and business case, that evaluators will use the existing evidence to inform ongoing and future evaluations, that researchers will conduct research to address knowledge gaps, that policymakers will formulate policies encouraging responsible uptake of proven financial inclusion interventions, and that the multilateral development banks and G20 will advocate for the role of financial inclusion and what they can play in the global agendas like climate action and economic growth. That financial service providers, they tailor the design and delivery of financial services to maximize adoption and impact that meet the longer term needs. So the Impact Pathfinder is based on a conceptual framework that links financial inclusion to outcomes. We've looked at 4 major intervention categories, so credit, savings, insurance, and digital payments. These are impacted by 3 categories of contextual variables. Firstly, the design and the delivery of a financial service. Secondly, the client and community socioeconomic characteristics. And thirdly, the broader ecosystem factors like macroeconomics, regulations, and social norms. These then drive 3 types of intermediate outcomes, which are helping clients become more resilient, capture opportunities, and increase agencies. Financial inclusion is integrated in these categories of outcomes. Over time, these intermediate outcomes, they drive major development outcomes, like women's economic empowerment, climate adaptation, mitigation and resilience, job and entrepreneurship, economic growth, financial stability, poverty reduction, and access to essential services like electricity, education, and healthcare. The reason why they're a bit gray here on this slide is because we haven't done them yet, but they are in the future for us to do coming forward. So now let's look at the big picture findings. So far, we have examined 18 impact pathways across 3 key development outcomes: women's economic empowerment, job and entrepreneurship, and climate action. And they've all been looked at in the context of different financial services. There is still a lot more to explore, but this is a good moment to zoom out and ask, what is the big picture telling us so far? So the evidence is clear. Financial services contribute positively to the well-being of vulnerable individuals and small businesses. But as you can see from this slide, the story is a bit more nuanced. So stepping back, what does this slide actually tell us? For most pathways, we see strong evidence that financial inclusion leads to positive impact. But for pathways that are not marked in blue, there's still a lot to uncover about what truly drives impact. And this doesn't mean we should deprioritize certain financial services. It's tempting to jump to quick conclusions and say, well, payments are better than credit, but that would miss the bigger picture. People, they need a full range of financial services. And the key question isn't which service is better, but rather what factors drive impact for each service and under what conditions do they work best. Since there's a lot of depth behind each of these pathways, we are breaking it down in a blog series that are exploring the insights for each of these development outcomes. Some of the blogs are already out there and more coming soon, so stay tuned for much more insights in this area. But now let's shift and do an actual live demo of the website. I know there was a video, it was very high level, so let us take you through some of the details of the Pathfinder. All right, so here you will see the main landing page. At the top, you'll see we have an about page and information about the underlying methodology, or you can find a technical paper that is describing the objectives, the conceptual framework, the inclusion and the quality criteria of the literature, and some of the limitations of the Pathfinder. You can also watch a short tutorial to help you navigate the platform, and we invite you to go do so and explore it on your own, on a laptop ideally. But for now, let's actually dive into the site. Okay, so by clicking the Explore Platform button, you will go to this page, which shows all the financial services and all the development outcomes we've explored so far. The page is quite dynamic in the sense that when you click on any of the financial services, you see all the development outcomes that we've explored so far, and those that we haven't examined yet will appear in gray. So now let's imagine that you're an investor and you're considering investing in microcredit to advance women's economic empowerment. You're interested in seeing what effect this has. You can explore this through selecting credit and the women's economic empowerment pathway. This will take you to this impact pathway view. Here you will see a snapshot of the relationship between credit and women's economic empowerment through two intermediate outcomes, so agency and opportunity. You'll notice the green lines, which indicate that credit has a positive impact by increasing agency and better jobs, opportunity for women and women-owned enterprises. You'll also see a mixed link between credit and women's owned enterprises, improving entrepreneurship opportunities. In the legend, you can see that the thickness of the arrows shows the strength of the evidence. So is it strong, moderate, or indicative? Whereas the colors shows the directionality of the evidence. So is it a positive link, moderately positive, mixed, or insufficient? On the right-hand side of the screen, you will see a high-level summary of the evidence supporting this relationship. You can expand to see more insights on each of the cards if you want to go deeper into the research. And you can also read more about the influencing factors that are coming up across the literature as important modulating factors for the outcome. You can also click to expand an intermediate outcome if you're interested in reading the synthesis insights from across studies or diving deeper into any of the individual studies. So say you're interested in learning more about the studies that inform these impact pathways, you can click on the evidence map at the bottom and you will view a heat map where you can see a bubble chart of all the different evidence that relates to that pathway. You can also view different details of the studies themselves. You can click on the study link and it will show you the number of studies, and you can then filter it by customer type, by geography, or even by aspect of financial health. In addition to this page, we also have a separate page that houses the insights of uptake and usage of financial services for 5 client types. This is a very high-level insights table that provides this information for different financial services. So now let's pretend you're an MFI working to improve financial inclusion amongst rural households and farmers. You know that there is a demand, but that few are taking up formal credit. You can then go to the customer uptake insights page for rural households and farmers to learn more about how the influencing factors are actually encouraging uptake and use for credit for this segment. On the right-hand side, you'll find insights and influencing factors that have come up across multiple user groups for each of the financial services based on a large number of studies examined. Finally, you can also ask the AI-powered chatbot questions for tailored answers based on the vetted literature in the Pathfinder. For example, if you want to learn more about what is the impact on payments and women's economic empowerment, it provides you with specific answers and the literature suggestions for that. So as we wrap up this live demo, I just want to leave you with a vision for the Impact Pathfinder. Over the next year, we will expand the number of impact pathways, we'll enhance the AI chatbot, we're going to improve the mobile experience, and we will strengthen the AI-assisted coding of the underlying literature. These improvements are designed to ensure that the Pathfinder remains relevant and valuable to you, but its true potential really lies in how it's going to be used. As an industry, we cannot afford to get lost in the data or stalled in debates about what works. Instead, we have the opportunity through the Pathfinder to align on effective strategies that drive real impact for poor and vulnerable communities. This is what the Impact Pathfinder offers, a dynamic, evolving tool for the evidence of financial inclusion. So I encourage you to explore it, integrate it into your work, and share your insights with us. Your feedback is absolutely invaluable, so please reach out to us at impactpathfinder@cgap.org. And if you'd like to stay updated on the future updates and features of the Pathfinder and CGAP's latest work, please also sign up for the CGAP Reader. You can find the link is being dropped in the chat. But now let's transition into our panel discussion. You might still, even though I gave a presentation, but I think some of you are still wondering, how can I actually use the Impact Pathfinder for my work? So to help answer that, I'm very thrilled to be joined by our esteemed panelists, Bushle, Stephanie, and Ed, who will share their experiences on how this tool can support decision-making across the financial inclusion industry. So to kick things off, I have two key questions for each of you. And Stephanie, I will start with you. What is your biggest frustration when searching for evidence of financial inclusion impact to inform decisions? And how do you see the Impact Pathfinder helping to address these challenges? I'll give you each 2 to 3 minutes to respond, and then I look forward to a dynamic discussion and followed by some Q&A. So let's dive in. Stephanie, over to you.
Sure. I would say a lot of frustrations, but I'll build on one thing that you said that I find interesting, which is things are a bit more nuanced, and I think that's underestimating. I mean, that's very kind, but it's really very, very nuanced, right? So I think that I think the financial inclusion industry has been sort of one of the most interesting industries where there is a lot of evidence. I think there are not that many industries where you can have a lot of papers that have been done for a very, very long time to try and understand the impact of certain product offerings on certain segments of the population. And we've done research for a number of years in all countries around the world. And I think that's a very, very valuable tool. I think that we've come to a point of maturity where we think we should use that more effectively. And using things effectively means finding them effectively, learning how to sort of framework and understand those effectively. And I think the pathway is really designed to that end. So we haven't seen the methodological note that's behind this, but there's been a very thorough review of all the papers out there. And it's not like searching on Google or even on any sort of AI platform. You really have a thorough analysis of what you can use and how you can use it. Even though when you look into it, you'll see that there are still many nuances. So there's a lot of room to try and understand. I was looking at, so for example, financial health lately. We were working on financial health quite extensively and trying to design specific interventions. And when you look at the research out there, which is broad, even then there is, you struggle to find very specific trends that are common across geographies, across product offerings, and across client segments. And then the definition of impact, and there was a question there in the chat, is also sort of nuanced. So I think there's firstly an opportunity to have access to very good information, because this has been filtered and not just in any way. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, we're really thinking beyond access to financial services, and we're really trying to shift that conversation. I think that's not a minor conversation. I think the big difference is for us now, financial inclusion expands to demonstrate impact on the lives of the people we serve. And I'm really stopping there because that's not that's very ambitious. And that's going from the aspiration to actionable impact. And to do that, you do need evidence, and you do need to learn on what has been built in the past. I'm going to pause here because there are a lot of many details to that, but I'd like the others to intervene. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephanie. I will ask for Ed now.
Yeah, sure. So we're an impact investor, and just to bring it back to why we need to look at the evidence. I think, as Michael said, it's about making smarter decisions in the future. We probably haven't always made the best decisions as a community. And that's about maximizing the chances of positive social outcomes, but also reducing the risk of neutral or negative outcomes too. But also as an equity investor, it's about making us better owners of companies, better shareholders. For us, it's not enough just to be a shareholder. You have to be active and on top of everything. And, I'll come on to it, but this is one of the reasons why I'm particularly excited about the Pathfinder. But to talk about frustrations, because that's what you asked, Karina, I think identifying the most relevant research, particularly for generalist investors who are investing across other areas, not just financial inclusion, is really tough. And as Stephanie said, there's so much research out there. And this was the reason why we actually became first involved in CGAP. It was to help us synthesize or point us towards the best evidence that we could use to test the hypothesis that a company's going to deliver positive change. So it's not about scarcity, it's about having research which is appropriately packaged for an applied situation, if that doesn't sound too technical. So for us, I think in terms of solving the problem, the Pathfinder is obviously a useful repository of research. I think there's 600 studies or so that sit underneath it. I think the aggregated summaries are hugely beneficial. And this is, to be very clear, it's not about being reductive about what we're trying to achieve. It's about just having an initial steer of where you think, we're never going to use the Pathfinder only to determine an investment decision, but it is, it's a useful steer to get us started. And then similarly, the indications of the strength of evidence, so moderate, mixed, or insufficient, that for us is particularly helpful because from a trusted source like CGAP, that has a lot of value. So related to that, it's not just about being, it is about making good investment decisions, but it's also about being efficient ourselves. And these days it can take endless amounts of time to trawl through the research and find the right stuff. So this at a very, very practical level, this is very helpful. And then I'll just share one more frustration, which is really around the contextualization of the research. We can find research for a digital bank in Brazil, but we can't really apply the same impact thinking or outcomes thinking to that in Angola, because they're such different contexts and very different dynamics. So for us, I think the influencing factors piece of the Impact Pathfinder, really identifying what the determinants of impact here is hugely important, because we really need to understand the environmental context. And I think for us, just digging into this, it's a fun way to explore that kind of information. And it's not just development relevant, it's also financially relevant for us too, because you're not just, those contextual factors, be it supportive regulation or be it, the level of product specificity also should mean that those products sell well. And I know that's not always the popular thing to say, but it is so important for an investor like us, which is looking for, above market returns at the same time as impact. And then the last point I'll share is the climate aspect of Impact Pathfinder. I really sound like I'm preaching, I've drunk the Kool-Aid, but I have. That is something which we struggle to identify, particularly in terms of adaptation. I know it's early stage, but we often struggle to make that link between a product and a context and the climate adaptation outcome. So having that clearly presented visually is very helpful, but also being able to dig into the latest research is great for us. So thank you, Karina, for all your work on it.
Thank you, Ed. I'm happy you drank the Kool-Aid. I have a lot of follow-up, but I will hand it over to Schlein first.
Great, thank you. Frustrations. I have many, but I think I'll just focus on two. I think, to a large degree, especially with where we are from a technology perspective, people might think that with so much research having been published, that if you're trying to deal with these interconnected challenges of financial inclusion, climate change, women's economic empowerment, etc., you could just lean on commercial AI solutions, right? But the truth is that there is a frustration here, and it's that with a lot of these solutions, frequency is used as a proxy for accuracy, and that's kind of what gets pushed out. And this is problematic because with the issues where we are doing research or wanting to get an understanding, these are often really frontier or emerging issues, and there is not a lot published. And so some of these things don't actually come up. And I think this is where Pathfinder is super useful, because you're able to get that data with regards to the questions and the kind of interconnected challenges you're trying to understand and develop solutions for. You're able to see how in the real world it's been used, right? So if we take access to credit at the intersection of that, entrepreneurship and climate, you can actually see what research has been done where we are seeing pro-climate solutions being put in the hands of low-income consumers thanks to inclusive finance products. We can see which countries it is, we can see where the evidence is still weak, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, that's one frustration, and I'm not saying that the Pathfinder solves all of it, but I think what the Pathfinder does is it starts to show us how we can leverage AI in a way that really makes sense, right, for the type of work that we're trying to do in the inclusive finance space. And hopefully others will take the lead from CGAP on that. So that's the one frustration I have and how it addresses it. The second one that I'll talk about is really that a lot of research that gets done and evidence that gets pushed out there can often just sit in the development sector. And I think that what CGAP is doing through just this convening, right, with FinDev Gateway, is you're pulling together a broad coalition, right, of actors who are building the solutions that will lead to the outcomes that we need. And I think, what I really hope will also evolve over time, and Sophie, I'm super passionate about this, is that our language will also start to bring together the broad coalition. Because for me, I find that, in the private sector, you might, for instance, be looking for solutions for scale. And we talk a lot about scale, but scale is really just the other side of the coin of inclusion. If you're not including people, you can't scale a fintech or climate tech solution, right? And so we need to help people know that this evidence is speaking to the thing they're trying to solve. Or something like, we talk a lot about access in the development space. And in the private sector, we talk a lot about market creation and development. And these, again, are two sides of the same coin. So I think that because you're convening all these people, the evidence is there, kind of the next part will be just making sure that we don't leave people out just simply because of language, because that can also be a frustration.
Thank you.
I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Bushile. It was great. You all brought really good use cases to the table. I have a few follow-up, and maybe you have also questions to each other. But Stephanie, at some point very early on in this project, you mentioned that this could become the eBay of knowledge exchange for researchers. And that kind of thought stuck with me because we do see a lot of research going into the same areas, right? But then you have, on the other hand, a lot of areas that are just insufficient evidence. But there seem to be just certain topics that drive researchers. But this could become like an area where you can kind of match researchers with funders, with practitioner solutions. So I would love you to elaborate a little bit more on that idea if you could.
Sure, and that really builds on what Buddha was just saying, that we have a common language. And I mean, for better or for worse, this language is already stating certain things in a certain way, which is really important. You can agree or not, but this does help sort of drive that conversation. Because, for example, financial health is an intermediate outcome. There's been a lot of debate on this, and what is an developmental outcome and what that means, which is a longer term outcome as well. And sort of we're already moving away from that sort of methodological discussion and saying, listen, there's something done there. Yeah, sure, you can see if it's better or worse, but there's a lot done. And now let's build on that. And that's what I was referring to when I was saying earlier, we're going to the action now. But the action really shows that the information is fragmented and the types of players are still talking in buckets, which is really what Willa was showing, right? And we shouldn't talk in buckets because we all have different incentives, different resources, and also different capacities to approach certain segments, right? So an investor will need a certain view, for example, a macro view, like Ed was talking a lot about the contextual factors, but probably a private investor or a private player like we are, we don't need the contextual that much. We're much more interested in the tools that we need to actually reach vulnerable segments. And so we all need to have sort of, when you showed at the beginning of that slide, you had the donors, you had the government, you had we all need to be on the same team because we're solving one issue. And like Bule said, they're all interconnected, right? So because we're actually sort of recognizing the complexity of the problem at hand. So for me, when I was thinking about the eBay, I was thinking about finding, okay, what issue do we want to solve? Let's define it. We already talk the same language. What research do we have? We've got the Pathfinder. Who's looking at it? And because a lot of us are at this platform and we all have sort of different backgrounds and different interests, that would be sort of the big next step. How do we now talk to each other to try and solve something together? Because, and I know that Michael was very sort of diplomatic and not going into the biggest, the elephant in the room, but really elephant in the room of what's happening now in the US is showing we have been ineffective. And that's a fact. There's no discussion about it. How we're managing it is another discussion. But there has been a lot of inefficiencies in how we approach and how we tackle these issues. And the problem is that the context we're working in it is a context with higher instability in many ways. GDP is going to be reduced. We're going to have higher shocks. We're going to have much, much more exclusion. And we were talking here about innovation. But there's a huge chunk of the population that is still underserved, that still doesn't have access to digital tools. And I'm not talking about, many people. I mean, there are a lot of people. And so there's going to be sort of two dynamics. One is on innovation for the people that you already serve. And probably this tool will help in that direction a lot. But there's still a lot of people that are not even in the conversation. And so these two dynamics of, how do you address further exclusion and how do you address being more efficient in a changing world that's changing really fast and where we don't have the luxury of using developmental, finances as much as we used to. How are we going to address that? So I think this is really the beginning of a much larger and complex conversation where the conversation is more about, okay, we know this is what we've done well, and this is what we're putting on the table, and sort of, tapping our backs, like this is great work that we've done, but we really need to shift the needle and have another type of conversation now. And I think this is the opportunity that we're sort of, putting out there. And we've already put some of the rules on the table. Let's, move beyond methodological conversations and, more about sort of the action and the long term, because this is also another issue that we find when we talk about impact. We mix the short term, the long term, the tools and the capacity to influence change. And these are very important things when you really want to drive change. And we haven't talked here even about, the business case of it. And Ed was, again, alluding to it. But this is one of the biggest conversations. We want to be efficient. We want to be able to scale. And it's not a conversation anymore about, if I'm giving a small loan, I'm going to poorer people. That, we're far beyond that conversation. We need to be much more sophisticated. A one size fits all doesn't work. We already know that. And the question is, how do we do this better, recognizing the complexity and the interconnection of all these elements? And I think this is where we're starting to have that conversation.
So well said, Stephanie. Thank you so much. I just want to kind of provoke you all. It was a little bit what you were saying, Bushle, around how the AI-generated tools right now are really measuring frequency as a proxy for quality almost. It wasn't fully what you said, but it was a little bit around, AI is evolving so fast. When we have an AI-powered chatbot in the Pathfinder, which is leveraging the 600 studies as a primary source for its answers, but it's also pulling in selectively from ChatGPT. So there's a whole coding that we're still learning. We're on a journey, right? But we are seeing this space, to Michael's point, evolve rapidly. And in a year from now, we might actually be in a situation where the Pathfinder has been taken over by tools that can now do it, and it can search and it can vet everything. That might be the future, right? But we still need somebody to set the framing. So for me, that's a lot of what the Pathfinder is doing, is actually setting the questions that should be asked around what is the development outcomes that financial inclusion is leading to, that you would not have an AI come up with. So it's a little bit also reflecting on the role that the Pathfinder plays beyond, to your point, Stephanie, but this thing about being an agenda setter and actually informing T20 of the role of a financial inclusion, that is different from its role as a search engine to actually generate the findings. So I want to hear a little bit, if you were to think about the future of the Pathfinder in a year from now, what would you think and hope that it would look like? And I know we haven't prepped this question, but and Michael, I'm also if you want to come in and join the conversation, I would love to hear your thoughts. But it's something that I'm reflecting on every day. So would love to hear your thoughts on it.
So my answer is maybe going to be something counterintuitive, which is that I don't think the focus needs to be on the Pathfinder as a tool, but rather on the purpose of it. Because as you say, the Pathfinder, if there's a better way to get the work done, then we need to be willing to let that go. And I think, as people in kind of this impact space, this is a muscle we need to learn to grow, to not become attached to tools, but really focus on the problems that we're trying to solve. The next big issue, maybe to do with stakeholders or whatever. So we keep the goal in mind, what's the outcome we want to see, and the tools must evolve, and we use the best tool for the job.
Maybe I can pick up on that. I do think the Pathfinder is enormously valuable, as we've all been talking about, in helping us sort through what we know today. But I'm also very excited about what we don't know today, but what we will know tomorrow. Because, as all of us know, there is this explosion of data, but very specifically, the PIX database in Brazil, for example, has 40% of all of the transactions in Brazil, and the UPI database in India has 40% of all the transactions in the world, not just in India, but in the world. 40% of the transactions are happening on one. We now have visibility and the ability to see correlations that we've never been able to do before. So I actually think the next round, the next few years on research is going to be stunning, and it's exciting to me. So now the Pathfinder is great about helping us know what we know today, but I'm even more excited about what we're going to know in just the next few years. So again, the timing is great.
Thank you so much, Bushley and Michael. I don't know, Ed and Stephanie, if you want to come in on this point as well. Stephanie, I know we are technically also partnering on the future of Michael's idea, so you might want to share a little bit more on that.
Yeah, well, on that particular point, I think it's a fun conversation because, of course, just think about methodology. The way the PIX is looking at outcomes is completely different from how providers are looking at outcomes. And I think that's a very interesting conversation, and seeing how they're thinking about it. They're really thinking about scale and access, and we're thinking about how to get deeper, right? And so this really talks about the future of the financial sector, which is basically, if we're going to open finance and if we're going to embedded platforms, that means that our challenge has now become much more difficult. And that's what I was implicitly referring to earlier as well, because the rules of the games are going to change in many countries. And PIX is I think what Brazil has done is a very, it's almost, the best case scenario. I think other governments that are trying to do that, they're not abiding by the exact same rules. That's for another conversation. But this is going to make it very, very hard for operators to really, aim for real impact. Because again, going to the business case, it's not evident. And so I think that for us as players, it's going to be a difficult conversation, not for regulators as well, of course, but they're having those conversations in many countries, not all of them, but many countries. But our question for us will be, we're going into a context that there's much more competition. The rules of the games are going to change, not only in competition, but in regulation. The burden for certain players is going to be different than for others. The type of, and the point is, how are we creating a system where you're really addressing the needs of the customer? Because that's really what this is about. This is about how are you going to address the needs of that person that, and I was talking to another player earlier yesterday, and they said, you know, what kind of client are you serving? I said, I'm serving someone that's illiterate. Literally, they don't know how to sign. That's the technological revolution that we're trying to bring. People that are completely informal, you refer to invisible people, and that's really it, right? So what kind of relationships are we going to build, and how are we able as providers to build those relationships? And I'm sure, Guli, you have a lot of ideas there, but the type of interactions we're going to have. And the interaction is important because the way poor people take decisions is completely different from how we can afford to take decisions. And it's literally how we can afford. And the incentives that I have as a financial player to address that need is different. That perhaps we need to redesign and think about how we're going to address that need in this changing context. So I think for me, this is, yes, we're going to harness technology, we're going to harness data. The question is, how do we do that in the most sustainable way where we're not leaving anyone behind and trying to think, in the long, for the long term, for the real impact, for the second, third generation, because currently we're still, we've gone back. Colombia, for example, not only in poverty, but we've excluded 30% of the population. Excluded, financially excluded. So we're going backwards like crabs. We're going backwards in how we're doing things, but changing the context and the rules of the game as well. So it's going to be a difficult conversation for sure. But I think that having, CGAP, for example, sort of try and say, listen, don't forget this. This is important. And we can do this in a sustainable way. The question is, how do we do it efficiently and thinking for the long term? And I think that I don't have the answer yet. We're trying to have those difficult conversations, but this is really what we are having, at least in our working group. And I think that having a regulator at the table is really, really, really useful.
Thank you, Stephanie. On this point, I would like to actually also pull in Sophie, because I know you have thoughts on this. And I saw a hand from you, Bushley, it went down, but after Sophie, I would like to hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Karina. So on the question of how I see the Pathfinder in a year's time evolving, there are two things that I would like to see it do. The first is continue to bring answers, but also raise questions on unknowns regarding the most pressing development issues. This is all about outcomes at the end of the day. And so, for instance, we have emerging findings from the Pathfinder on the relationship between financial inclusion and jobs, job creation, youth, nano entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs. That is an incredibly important agenda for the world today, where a lot more youth is coming on the labor market, but not enough jobs are being created. Lots of people are involved in informal nano micro enterprises as the main livelihoods solution they have. So how can financial inclusion contribute to the resiliency, but also the growth, the sustainability of jobs through these small firms? I think it's fundamental. And the evidence is there. It is positive. There's a clear positive relationship. But we need more. We need to know how we can get them to the next level, for instance, of growth. Similarly, on climate, the Impact Pathfinder is showing a very clear relationship between access to finance and adaptation, resiliency, the ability to build financial cushion to resist shocks, but also the ability to adapt and recover. Yet we have very little evidence of the relationship between financial inclusion and the adoption of green technologies, a just transition. So that's what I would like to see, that the Pathfinder, through maybe the eBay marketplace that Stephanie, you talked about, and therefore additional dedicated specific research to address these pressing fundamental issues for the world. That's one of the key things I'd like to see. The second is, everybody has talked about AI and the role of data in fostering greater, better, more customer adjusted solutions for the poor. But I think AI can also be a tool for us to measure our impact and to be our compass, or to fundamentally to set up new indicators and targets for the industry. And I think the Pathfinder is the right foundation for that, because it basically tells us what we should measure. What are the outcomes we can aspire to, that we know financial inclusion contributes to? So with that understanding of the contributions we should aspire to make to development, Now we have an opportunity to leverage data to say, how are we going to measure that? And then set indicators for our industry to work to it. So that's what I'm excited to see the Pathfinder contribute to going forward. Thank you, Karina.
Thank you, Sophie. Schlein, and then over to you, Ed. I don't want to skip you.
Thanks, Karina. Sophie kind of touched on the direction I wanted to go in, which was really just to say that where I think there continues to be scope is kind of in context, right? Because a lot of what the Pathfinder is doing is really surfacing what is happening in context, helping us figure out how systems are actually working. Things like why discovery is broken. You can't, Stephanie, I think you mentioned when people just can't read. We can't see their transactional data because they're just completely out of the system. And we need to get those insights and understanding, kind of offline as it were, and bring it into the fold. So I think that area will remain incredibly relevant for a very long time. And there's huge scope there.
And I would just add that something very related to that is, so firstly, I have a shopping list of things I would like to be added, Karina. But the second thing is about that system, taking us more of a systemic approach. If we're really talking about development, the best thing for me would be to understand where the intervention is required, in a different context. So perhaps, you don't want to make it too complicated, but layering on what needs to happen in certain geographies that, where there's real gaps. And then gaps in research as well, because for us, I think on my shopping list is things like buy now, pay later and stuff. I know that's a subset of credit, but it's exploding across the world in so many different places, and those more like innovative products, because the financial services providers are innovating faster. So we need to be able to catch up and understand what these things mean.
Thank you so much, all of you. I think it's time to open up for some questions from all the people who are still joining. So I think I have a question here. I'll just read it up first. So in your review and constructions of the Pathfinder, were there areas where you were most surprised by either the lack of evidence, so depth of studies, or where the evidence showed interventions were actually not impactful? So this is a really good question. And I would say, so for the climate pathways in particular, and this is a little bit to your point, Schlein, around knowledge gaps and what we're seeing, and also you, Ed, about like the lack of climate adaptation. There were less evidence on the climate than if you go in and look into women's economic empowerment has been very well researched as a development outcome, but climate less so. And that is in part because we are not even sure what are the right research questions to adequately reflect climate adaptation. So even within our team, we had a lot of discussions around what is the research questions that we are actually looking at when it comes to climate adaptation, or even climate mitigation for MSMEs, not SMEs. We had a lot of time discussing that too. And there is difference actually if you look at the evidence on SME versus MSME. We have on the Pathfinder intentionally focused on literature focused on impact and smaller businesses, so MSEs, not on the larger firms. But there was just in general for that development outcome less evidence. And on the other part of the question around where there are any not impactful. So I think in this, again, Sophie, you can talk to this as well, but on the credit, this has been a long-standing criticism of our industry, right? Of you've seen the articles, journalists pointing to one study that they have seen that has come up with over-indebtedness. But so looking at credit, what we have in general found is mixed evidence. And so, Sophie, I will actually hand it over to you to say a little bit more about that.
Yes, I was going to say this is for me the instruments for which the Pathfinder is the most useful because of the noise that the industry has been in a way the victim of due to the lack of coherent analysis of all the evidence. So for me, the Pathfinder shows overwhelmingly a positive relationship. So it does show that credit contributes to positive outcomes for beneficiaries, but it has limitations. And what is, I think, useful is that the Pathfinder highlights very specific areas where credit is basically not sufficient. And I'll highlight two. One is when a vulnerable family or individual is subject to recurring shocks. So imagine a climate environment where there are for instance, a rural household in a climate-exposed countries where you have several climate shocks affecting the same family over a short period of time. Then, unfortunately, unless repayments are flexible and the cash flow repayment of the credit can be adapted to the cash flow earnings of the family, there is a tendency to recur to additional credit to repay the existing ones. And that leads them to over-indebtedness. So that's one case where credit has been inadequate, but it can be solved through better structuring and repayment terms, better adjusted to the cash flow situation of the household. The second case that we see from the Pathfinder where credit has been fundamentally insufficient, not bad, but insufficient, it's really what to lead microfirms to the next step change. Credit fundamentally is good as working capital, it's good to build resiliency, but it is not sufficient to acquire the innovation, the asset, the technology that will enable a microfirm to get to the next levels and grow in terms of jobs, for instance, etc. And that is mostly because credit to small firms like this is very short-term. And for those kinds of investments, you need longer-term credit or possibly another instrument like equity. So again, it is not a limitation of the instrument per se, but of the way it is structured and offered, and maybe of the expectations from the instrument. But so I think for me, that was an incredibly useful findings because it allows us to understand where the noise comes from, but be comfortable in the fact that overwhelmingly it is positive, it is creating positive impacts, but that we really need to think about how we offer it, to whom and under what terms and conditions to maximize its impact. And that's exactly what the Pathfinder was supposed to do. So yes, it's a good example, Karina. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm just doing a little time check. We have 5 minutes left. So is there one person on the dialing in as a participant that would like to open their microphone, first raise their hand, and we can take a live question? It's a little bit more interactive before I hand it over to my colleague, Valdetta, who is going to give you all an announcement and then a few closing remarks. But I don't see the hands here just because I can't.
Karina, there was a question on geographies, and I think you could talk to that. The Pathfinder's analysis of geographical studies.
Can you just read the question? Sorry.
Somebody was asking if the Pathfinder gives specific results for specific regions.
Okay, yes. So what you can do is in my little live demo, you can go into the evidence map. So for whatever impact pathway, so there are two ways to do it. But the evidence map will give you a way to sort by geography, so where the research has been done based on the pathway of your interest. The other way is to ask the chatbot for a specific impact pathway and then ask, is there a certain literature of whatever geography that you're interested in? And the Pathfinder chatbot will elevate that. So that would be the two ways. I would just say that for each of the pathways, we're also saying at the very top where the majority of the research is focused. So whether it's been in Asia or Latin America or kind of the region of focus. And that is basically based on what is there. Obviously, we are a little bit limited by the fact that we have not added Spanish or French or Arab literature. So it is very based on the English literature. Again, this could be a future iteration of the Pathfinder down the line if there is a wish to add that. But so, yeah, I just want to put that limitation in as well. Is there any other questions that should be answered or any concluding remarks from you, Sophie, before we hand it over to Valdete? Right. Okay. So I think I will thank you so much, all of you, Bushli, Stephanie, and Michael, for also jumping in. Sophie has something to say.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going back to the questions. There was a very nice suggestion to have a section where users of the Pathfinder can suggest areas of research or of disaggregation of the pathways that they would find useful. I think that is a very constructive idea, because we really want this tool to be a tool that we all use collectively. And so we'll pick up on that idea and try to see whether we can build this. But otherwise, feel free to use the email address that Kirina has sent through the chat to also send us suggestions. So this is a tool that will continue to evolve with your inputs.
Thank you, Sophie. And thank you, everybody. I'll hand it over to Valdete.
Thanks, everyone. Just 1 minute. It's not going to be long. Before we close, I just wanted to share 2 resources with everyone. One is the Financial Inclusion 2.0 paid collection page on CGAP.org, where you can go and learn more about all the work that CGAP is doing on outcomes, because Impact Pathfinder is just one aspect of the work we're doing. So I invite you to go to that page. Sarah, my colleague, is posting the links on the chat. And the second page is on FinDev Gateway. We've created a community space where we are going to try to collect and feature a curated set of resources from different organizations outside of CGAP who are working on outcomes. So if you have if you have resources, you've developed a framework, a method, or data, or you're struggling with something in how you're working towards outcome and you want to share that with a broader community, you're welcome to reach out. We've included the instructions at the end of the page in terms of how you can submit that content, and the FinDev team will take a look and will respond. But we're interested in knowing really, how is your organization working towards outcome? What are you learning? What are the challenges you're facing? And any sort of solutions or tools that you'd like to share. And then last, on the next page, we're also conducting a stakeholder survey. So this is a CGAP stakeholder survey. We'd love it if you take less than 10 minutes to respond to the survey, just to let us know. There's a range of questions that will help CGAP refine CGAP strategy and strengthen our impact. So please do take a moment to take that survey today before you close the computer. And then for more on, so as I said earlier, we will, we'll share the recording after the webinar early next week, and we invite you to continue to contribute towards this discussion. So I'm really thankful to all of our speakers for joining us today, and everybody for finding time on their Friday to share it with us. So thanks again, and have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.